Mhm. Well, welcome everybody to our Building Local Power training. So today we have myself, uh, Olivia from Open Democracy, as well as we're joined by Liz Tantarelli from the League of Women Voters and Stephen Bourne from the Rise Civics League. And we're going to be discussing the different town meetings and the structure of local government that we have here in New Hampshire. So first, we're going to kick off with a land acknowledgement. Open Democracy acknowledges that we do our work on Indakina, the unceded homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. We honor the land and waterways and the Alanobak people who have stewarded the Indakina throughout the generations and continue to do so today. Open Democracy's mission is an equal voice for all, achieved by reducing the influence of money in politics and protecting the freedom to vote and ensuring fair redistricting in the state. So I will hand it over to Liz to talk about the basics of town meeting.
Okay, well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. All my adult life, I've lived in towns with traditional town meeting, and I've been a great supporter of it because it's the purest form of democracy that we've got. This is where all the voters come together and they really make the decisions. We talk about the moderator as the person in charge of town meeting, but the voters can actually override the moderator in a town meeting. The power is ultimately in the town meeting. And so even for those of you who don't live in traditional town meeting towns, trying to encourage people to go to town meeting is so important. That's where a bulk of our taxes are decided. We want to spend the best we can on our schools, on our towns, make it the best that we can afford. And this has been going on since the 1600s, since colonial times. Traditional town meetings have been held. Of course, women had no part in it back then, you realize, and now we're there and we're important. And there are two purposes. The first is to elect town officers, your select board, your town clerk, and a number of other boards, positions, but also in what is sometimes called the business portion, to deliberate and vote on all other town business, including the town budget, warrant articles, and capital projects. And capital projects can be a big expense for a town. So it's important that people come out and make the best decisions that they can. So the moderator sets the rules for town meeting. But as I said, voters can overrule the moderator. And the moderator should be announcing that at the beginning of the meeting. Other than that, no, voters have to practice decorum. You can't talk without being recognized. You have to state your name and where you live. And, it wouldn't just be the town. You'd normally give the street address. And if somebody is disruptive, the moderator can ask that they be removed from the meeting. So it is a very down-to-earth, close-up and personal kind of thing. Next slide, please.
That is it.
Oh, okay, there, sorry. But the town meetings are open to the public, but only the registered voters in that town can vote for town officers, debate, and vote on the warrant articles presented to the meeting. So other people can observe, and sometimes you may see children there, but obviously they can't vote. So I do want to address the question of what if there's a blizzard that's going to interfere with either the election portion or the business portion of town meeting. And I think it's about 5 years ago now that we had back-to-back years with blizzards on town meeting day in March. And so the legislature passed a law allowing absentee voting until 5 p.m. the day before the election, if, and only if, there is a National Weather Service official storm warning for your town. Sometimes it's the whole state, we realize that, but it's got to at least include your town. And the legislature agreed that if that came on the part of the business portion of town meeting, the in-person portion, that could be delayed for up to 2 weeks if necessary. That would also include another emergency, if there's a fire or burn down the building where you're supposed to meet and so on. But I want everybody to be aware of this possibility of absentee voting on the day before the election of officers. That's where you actually go into the ballot box, in case of a storm. And it's happened since this law was passed. You know, we were sending out warnings about it last year. Next slide. Now, during a traditional town meeting, voters will vote on proposed warrant articles by a public vote. So it's not necessarily, you don't go into a ballot box, you know, you're doing this in public. But there also can be yes, no secret ballots. So frequently they give you a little packet of yes, no, different colored pieces of paper. And that might be used if there is a call for a secret ballot, or if there's a capital project that has to be voted on with the secret ballot, and you'll line up and you'll go through and you'll drop in your ballot. There can also be on the ballot petitioned warrant articles. It takes only 25 voters in the town to sign a petitioned warrant article for it to be included in the warrant. So you think that it's only the official business of the town, but there may be some special interests that want to put a warrant article on there. Now, town officers are elected by an official secret ballot at the polling place during polling hours on election day. And for most towns, that election day is the second Tuesday in March. A few towns do it second Tuesday in April, and a few towns do it in May. But the bulk of our towns do it at that March meeting. And in at least some towns, I don't know if it's all, they also vote on zoning changes by secret ballot on election day. Next slide. If you've never been to a traditional town meeting, you ought to go to one, even if you don't live in one of these towns, because it can be a hoot and a holler. Because the deliberation that goes on each warrant article can get very interesting. People sometimes talk far too long. They get far too personal. They get into a harangue. But that's what happens. Each warrant article, including the budget, gets talked about. It can go on for hours. And I'm making it sound terrible, but it's really very interesting. And then each vote is taken directly after each warrant article. So it's not as though you're doing all the discussion and then you all vote. You know, it's discuss, vote, discuss, vote. Now, there are some traditional town meeting towns that schedule information sessions in advance, especially if there's some unusual articles coming up that, you know, they don't quite know about. There's also a requirement for some public hearings. And there are some towns that will pass out very good information ahead of time, mailing information packets, for instance. Other towns don't, and people may not know what the ballot is. They could always find out, but they may not know. And of course, during this deliberative stage, that's when residents pose questions. They share their personal expertise, their facts, their analysis, and then the vote is taken. Next slide, please. Okay. And there are different ways to cast your vote at town meeting. Sometimes it's a simple show of hands. Sometimes they ask everybody to stand who's voting yes. Okay, they count you, go around, then sit down, then stand for no. Sometimes it's a voice vote. It can be colored cards that you have to hold up instead of the hand. That way they can know that it's somebody who checked in and has one of that colored packet of cards. Or it can be by that secret ballot that I talked about, these colored cards that say yes or no on them. Voters can request voting by paper ballot on any particular warrant article. And I think it's 5 or more voters. It's a small number who have to sign a piece of paper saying, we request this be paper ballot. If they do that, then the voting on that question has to remain open for at least 1 hour. It's possible that you can get everybody in the room who's voted, now they're back in their seats, and you can go on with the other business. You can go on to another warrant article, but you don't report the results of the vote on that secret ballot article until after that 1 hour. What that does sometimes is give a family with kids the chance to have one person vote, go home, mind the kids, and the other person comes back and votes. And I've seen that happen with large capital articles, for instance, capital projects. And I did start out by saying any member of the public can attend town meeting, but you have to be a registered voter living in that town and physically present in order to vote on warrant articles. There is no absentee ballot for a traditional town meeting business portion. You've got to be there. That's it. Next one. Just like at state elections, you may register to vote at the supervisor session, up before the town meeting, anytime at your town clerk's office before the supervisor session, or you can you can register to vote at the polls on election day, but you may not register to vote at the business portion of town meeting, which in most traditional towns is held on another day from that ballot place, polling place election. I hope that's clear. So if you're going to vote at the polling place, you're going to go into the booth and cast your vote for select board. Yes, you can register that day at the polls if you're new in town, but you can't skip that and then just go to the business portion and register. And I do have to remind you that because of a bill that was passed last year and took effect after the November 4th election, that now you have to prove your age, identity, US citizenship, and where you live in order to register to vote. You need paper proof of all of those. We didn't always need paper proof of US citizenship. You had to be a citizen. You didn't have to show a passport or birth certificate for it or naturalization papers. Now you do. That law will be challenged in court, but it's the law right now. And I think that finishes mine, does it? Let's go to the next slide and okay, yep, all right, I will keep quiet.
Okay.
All community.
All right. So SB2 towns, the SB came from the Senate bill it was named after. And the history, our town in Rye is SB2. Many years ago, some residents wanted to go back to town meeting, and I didn't know which way I felt. So I did a whole bunch of homework. And what I learned was that what makes town meeting work in the old days was that you went to the blacksmith. All right, the blacksmith maybe went and bought milk from you. People got to know each other. And so at the town meeting, you weren't going to be, you were less likely to be mean, nasty, et cetera, to each other because you had relationships. What they found was happening when towns got to be 4,000 to 5,000, that you would get a mob of people coming in to vote on one issue and then leave. And so people weren't being nice to each other. And so the Senate, to address that issue, came up with the SB2. And as Liz talked about, it works differently, where we first have a deliberative meeting, which is very similar, where we go through the warrant articles. Now, one of the things that I'm pretty sure it's like this on town meetings, zoning ordinances and change made to the land use regulations, they can't be changed at a deliberative meeting. You can only have inputs and comments at the 2 public hearings that all those changes require, leading up to the town deliberative meeting. And at the meeting, as you go through the warrant articles, the key thing is that they can be changed. You could, even the budget, you could reduce the budget line items by up to 10%. And also you can increase the budget for issues. And with the warrant articles, you can do anything to them except for delete the entirety of the context. You can't just go warrant article 16, no. It has to retain the essence of the warrant article. And so you go through the whole discussion, the debate, and the trade-offs are, well, the people that were in and heard all those discussions, the pros and cons, etc., they heard all the arguments. And our town, if we can get anywhere between 100 and 200 people at the town deliberative meeting, that's good. But when we have the official ballot, that second Tuesday in March, we can have up to 1,400 to 1,600 people voting. So a lot more people vote, but they're less educated and informed about the issues because they didn't hear the discussion. So that's I think the key things about how an SB2 town differs from that. And at the official ballot, you'll vote for every warrant article and everyone in the office. And that ballot can be 6, 7, 8, 10 pages long, especially if there's a lot of land use regulations, because they get printed in their entirety. Okay. All right. I think the next slide, and that's it for SB2, right?
Believe so.
Yeah. There's final vote taken during the. Yep, and that's the key. And one of the things that Liz mentioned, I know that people from out of town can speak at the deliberative meeting. The body needs to give them permission to speak, to hear from somebody else that is not a resident. And we vote the same way as town meetings with yellow cards, for or against. And there's a whole process of, same thing with town meeting, how you go about making amendments and changes to those warrant articles. Okay.
So there's actually a third form of, well, actually I want Steve to talk through this slide first, and then we'll go to the other.
Yeah, so one of the things, like Olivia introduced me, is I'm the president of Rye Civic League. I'm also the one that puts out the Common Denominator newsletter, which tells you about what all the nonpartisan groups are doing across the state. But if you, let's say, come from a big city, you come from a different state, and you come into a town, people that have never seen a deliberative meeting or a town meeting have no idea how the government works. So a number of years ago, the Civic League created the Citizens Handbook that explains how our local government works. And we print out a whole bunch every year. We put them in the library, town hall, we give them to real estate agents. And it's just a great tool to help people understand how the government is structured, the different entities, what they do, etc. And so the whole thing with what the Civic League does, as far as our monthly civic news and the handbook, if anyone's interested in rinsing and repeating, we'd love to see it happen. And leave off anything, Olivia?
No, I think that's great that you for your town and how you've built power in your town is create a handbook for the people who don't go to deliberative session to sort of know a little bit about what's on the ballot.
Yeah, so we put out additional tools. So one of the things the Civic League does is the Thursday before the deliberative meeting, we present the budget, because the budget you typically get, this is what we spent last year, this is what we spent this year. There's no story. So we've been putting all the budget numbers into spreadsheets for 15 years, and we try to tell the story of the town and the school budget. And then we take the warrant articles, because they can be long and lengthy. We give a presentation and give the background, because there's a lot of history, information, etc., that you just can't get at a meeting, or read it or be prepared for it. So we present all that with the links, documents, and then we summarize all the warrant articles in a table, so that you can go in there and think, all right, this is it, this is what I want, and you can take your notes. So we provide all of that out to the people in Rye, and a voting sheet. These are my votes, the tallies. We deliver all of that as part of what we do in the monthly civic news. And the other thing we do too, by the way, to mention, is that we put out the results that night. And that's probably one of our most read civic news, is because we go down there and we get the final numbers. And then that night, we send it out and everyone gets the results at about 10 o'clock that night.
The charter process described below. I don't see.
Oh, Olivia, I just realized we didn't talk about how a town can change the way it votes. And I thought I should explain that, as I said, traditionally, our New Hampshire towns were for hundreds of years voting in the traditional town meeting format. When SB2 came in, a town had to vote to adopt that system. And so they would vote one year and it would be in effect the next year. There is a way for SB2 towns to revert to traditional town meeting form as well. Again, they'd have to, get it on the warrant article, and I think there's a supermajority needed to revert. But, the towns, larger towns and cities have charters that take care of this, and I think you're going to talk about that, but I did want to talk about that shift from traditional to SB2. Thank you.
Great. And do you want to take David's question too about the average size of SB2 towns?
So
Yeah,
You-
just take it, Steve.
the research was that once you get to about 4,000, that's really where your community should start switching to it. That's what the numbers were showing, that most of the communities, that's about the break point.
And I think if you look at that list of the towns that are in SB2 town, you'll see a lot of that sort of Rockingham County, so a lot of southern New Hampshire towns. So I sort of think about it as sort of a lot of southern New Hampshire towns are SB2 towns, and a lot of the northern towns are that. But it does break down into sort of population too. A lot of the larger towns have switched. We'll go to the next form of different towns. So town council towns. So these are town council forms of government. So instead of having a board of selectmen, many of these have town councils and town managers forms of government. In town manager forms of government, a little bit more power is given to the town manager and less to the elected body. So Derry and Durham both have town council forms of government. They do still have town meetings, but there's sort of different safeguards within the city charters or town charters in both of those communities. So Derry and Durham are town councils with town manager forms of government. There's also something that is a town council form of government that has powers similar to city councils, and they are official town ballot towns. So Hooksett, Londonderry, Merrimack, and Newmarket are those town council towns, and the town meeting in Bedford is only for budget. The town council handles sort of approving those sort of zoning changes and other things. In Bedford, the way the Bedford town charter is written, it's town meeting is for budget only. So I just wanted to share that there are variations of how town government works based on where you live. And so, you can move from one town to another and town meeting is done slightly differently. And so to understand that there are variations. I noticed we had a couple of people from Manchester and Laconia on the call tonight. So I just wanted to say that cities have a totally different form of government. So if you live in one of the 13 cities, most of them have a city council, city manager form of government, where the city manager is the chief executive officer and kind of the head, can hire and fire people, whereas that duty is sort of given, to folks. I mean, I've seen even at town meeting where there's been hiring decisions made, most of them budgetary, but some of them are personnel and personality issues. I do want to say that Manchester and Nashua actually have a mayor and alderman, and the voters will elect that sort of chief administrator officer, which is the mayor, the mayor. And so in those communities, there is not a sort of this city manager the mayor has more power in the cities that have city managers. The city manager kind of has more of the administrative duties. So 11 of the 13 cities have elections. And so election will be November 4th, 2025. The city of Franklin has October elections every year. So this year is October 7th. And Lebanon is the only city that has city elections or municipal elections on Tuesday, March 11th. And I think that's part of the reason is that they share a school district with the other towns around them. So they also have their sort of school district stuff. And so they do all of their administrative stuff at the same time at the March deadline. The other thing I want to just note, because we've talked a little bit about city budgets, some cities adopt a budget in March and it's for a calendar year, and some cities and towns have different fiscal years. Some fiscal years, I know in the city of Franklin, it's July 1 through June 30th. So you also want to be aware of that on budget issues, you know, especially if they're discussing plowing and we're already into March of the winter of what that plowing budget looks like. So just to be aware of your community's budgetary fiscal year.
All right, so that's going to hop over to me. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the different offices that you would be voting for and different offices that you can run for during town meeting. So for filing for office, any voter who's interested in serving in a town or school district public office must file a declaration of candidacy with the town clerk or school district clerk, depending on which one, between the second Wednesday and the Friday of the following week before the town election. Depending on the date of your town election, this is going to vary. So for example, traditional town meetings with that March election, their filing period is January 22nd to January 31st. And I went ahead and linked the political calendar there. So if you are not in one of those traditional towns, you can look up what those deadlines are for your community. Now, some village districts use this process. However, most nominate and elect officers from the floor of the meeting at their usual annual business meeting. All right, so who can be an election official? In New Hampshire, election officials must meet the following requirements. There are, of course, additional requirements that may exist for the different positions, but these are the three basic ones. You have to be registered to vote in New Hampshire. You must be at least 18 years of age, and you must be a resident of the town or city that you're running for. And then these are a couple of the positions that you would be voting on, depending on the schedule and what positions are open in your town meeting. So the first one is supervisor of the checklist. They're responsible for things like registering new voters, maintaining the town's and ward's voter list, holding public sessions to register new voters and process changes and corrections, certifying and posting the voter list, taking trainings to keep current on election law and processes, and election work registering voters on election days.
And typically this is a 6-year term and are elected in even years. But many supervisors of the checklist have resigned, and we're noticing that there's a fair amount of supervisor of the checklist positions posted in 2025, and they're running for the remainder of the term that somebody resigned for. So if you see a supervisor of the checklist position in an odd year, they're just filling the seat, filling in for somebody who may have resigned.
Then we have the town clerks, which is another locally elected official with duties including preparing official ballots for town elections, accepting voter registration applications, reporting the results of meetings and elections, taking custody of ballots and following the counting on election night. They tend to have a very broad role that they perform. They have a lot of different duties that they take care of throughout the year. Generally, They're the ones preparing the minutes for the meeting, summarizing the discussion from the floor for each of the articles discussed. Once the period for recount has expired, so once there are no more recount requests that can be filed, the clerk notifies people who have been declared the winners for their contest and informs them that they must appear to take the required oath of office. And the clerk may administer that oath, but the moderator and town select person and justices of the peace can also perform that duty.
And I will say that a lot of communities have an appointed city clerk. So make sure to check your community, whether you elect your city clerk or or town clerk is appointed. And some people have gone to appointed town clerks versus elected town clerks. So this does vary.
Yes. Then we have the moderator, who, as has been alluded to earlier in the meeting, they kind of run the show for town meetings. They're the ones who set the rules for decorum. They're the ones who are responsible for enforcing those rules. Ultimately, if they make a calling that the public does not agree with, they can override those rulings. So that is something to keep in mind. They'd answer questions from voters, preside over both the town meeting and any town elections, ensuring that all of those processes are running smoothly, and they're responsible for counting the votes and reporting those results. There are many more duties as well that they do, but these are some of the basics. And then we have the select people and the select board. Select board's kind of the governing body, comprised of the select people elected to 3-year terms at the town meeting. They're responsible for posting and distributing the warrant prior to town meeting, managing the prudential affairs of the town, and performing all other duties imposed by law. The select board has limited oversight over other elected officials, but otherwise, they're supervising town employees and operations of the local town government. Generally, they're only able to act by majority vote of the members of that board. They can't typically make decisions independently as board members. And then over to warrant articles.
So the New Hampshire Constitution allows voters to put ideas on the petition warrant article. So whether that's changing the hours of the transfer station or, doing a petition warrant article, calling on the state legislature to take action. These petition warrant articles can be put by citizens. So this is where citizens really have a voice in the process. If you want something changed, you must get 25 signatures from any registered voter to put this idea in front of your fellow voters at town meeting. The deadline for these petition warrant articles follow that kind of same January deadline for running for office, so that January 21 deadline. So if you're thinking about putting a town warrant article on your town meeting, you best go get signatures sort of this week and next. The town dump is a great place to do that. I always say that if you're doing a town warrant article, talk to your town clerk because they verify those signatures. And I saw that David asked in the chat about those signatures. And so please make sure your town clerks are kind of know you're doing that and making sure you're collecting the information they need in order to verify the signatures of those 25 people. A lot of people think they're registered to vote and they may not be. So because you're required a minimum of 25 signatures, I urge people always to collect a few more just in case a name is not a registered voter. Take the next slide. We have some information on the Open Democracy website and some sample of how to draft warrant articles. And so you do have to make sure that that language of the petition warrant article is written in a particular way. Some town clerks get a little weird about the whereas clauses, so it's always good to check with them. And that warrant article text needs to be at the top of every signature. So if you had a top of one page and then signatures on one page and then signatures on another page behind it, the second page is not allowed unless the text of the warrant article is also printed on that. And as I said, the signatures are due early in January, so check with your town clerk to get the deadline so that you don't miss the deadline in submitting signatures for warrant articles. Steve, did you have any more things to say about warrant articles before we go to this next?
No, I think you hit the wording. It's got to be a question when you write it, and that, the same thing, we always try to collect over 30 signatures because they'll find reasons to reject people. And with the SB2, the key thing is just getting that warrant on the docket to be discussed at the deliberative meeting, because you always have time to change it at our deliberative meeting because the wording doesn't get finalized until after the town deliberative meeting.
Wonderful. Liz, over to you.
Okay, so you have probably read in the newspapers about the Kearsarge School District and the big flap over their budget. So school districts often act the same way SB2 towns did. So they had their deliberative session last Saturday, and a small group of residents, 35 from, unfortunately, my former town mostly, had proposed a very stringent budget cap on the school district budget. It wasn't anything specific, cut this or cut that, where they had analyzed it. It was just slash the budget. And when word of that got out, we went from I wasn't there, I have since moved out of the district, but the deliberative session last Saturday went from a typical maybe 100 people attending to 1,500 people attending because they wanted to vote against that. Yes, so there's democracy at work. Word went out, it went out personally, it went out in the news, it went out in social media. Parents apparently testified, kids testified about the quality of the education and that they would not tolerate this autocratic budget cap. And so of the 1,500 plus votes cast, 92% defeated it. And those 35 residents had about another 75 people who supported them, and that was it. So when you think about the amount of money that your towns and schools spend and the power that is in these deliberative sessions, you see why this was important. And that was a beautiful example.
And this is why, citizen power matters, and getting neighbors to show up at town meeting matters too. Because oftentimes decisions are made by just a handful of individuals at town meeting, but it's good to try to get maximized participation.
And these are just a couple of resources to look up more information about your town meeting. The Secretary of State has some great information on his town meeting guide. The New Hampshire Municipal Association has a great primer about warrant articles and just the different roles that are elected. And then again, we have that full political calendar in case you don't know when the deadlines are for filing to run for office or any of those different filing deadlines.
And also make sure to see what your town is doing, because some towns have an election day cake or a bake sale that draws people in. Liz, you want to talk about the dinner?
Yeah, in Newbury, the town I lived in for 25 years, the beautification committee held a free ham and beans supper. Free. It was free. Yes, just before town meeting. And, ham and beans are not that expensive or exciting, but boy, people came out because the communal atmosphere of sitting down to this free supper before you go into town meeting was just electrifying. Lots of people came, and it was a great thing at the end of winter to see your neighbors for a change instead of just waving at them over a snowbank. So if you can find something that will bring people out, that it recreates that feeling from colonial times of a social experience, I think that will help increase participation.
And in Rye, what we do is we've turned at the town deliberative meeting, we have a civic fest at the lunch. So we get Seacoast Soups to bring in soup, or we do it, and we get some sandwiches. So at the lunch break, we have it there, and then we invite the different departments, the police, the fire, Rec, the library, conservation, any group in town to have a table so they get to meet and chat with residents during the lunch break.
Autumn, do you want to take down the slide presentation? We can all have a discussion. So if there's questions that people had about town meeting specific to your town or your city, we can try to answer them. Or if you have a story from town meeting that you want to share. Fran, go ahead. Just if you don't mind unmuting yourself.
I have a question regarding towns that have wards.
Okay.
Do they have one town meeting?
And you're in Merrimack, right?
I'm in Merrimack now, but I just got an email from somebody who wants to do a petition to have a warrant for Merrimack to have wards.
Great. Towns that have wards, that is a very good question. My understanding is that voting happens in those ward districts, like in Salem. Salem is one of those towns that have voting districts. But then town meeting is one of those events where everybody goes to one sort of deliberative session for the community. But I believe Salem is an SB2 town. Somebody could correct me if I'm wrong on that. There has been an effort to encourage people to sort of, in larger towns, to split their voting districts up into voting districts. And I'm happy to chat with you offline about some of the mechanics of how that's been done in other communities, and also connect you with Mary Beth Raven, who's also been really good at writing or been successful in Merrimack with petition warrant articles. And so she also knows some tricks and tips in Merrimack.
This was the ACLU wanted me to join a meeting in a couple of weeks. They have a petition started that they're starting.
Mm-hmm. But and that petition needs to be submitted in January, so they've got to hustle to get those signatures. But I think personally, I think that this is a great idea, especially in large communities, to have smaller polling places and voting districts where you can have representatives not from the same neighborhood, but that that your representatives are divided. But other people have different opinions about dividing into smaller voting districts. Liz, do you want to say anything more about voting districts?
Well, cities have wards and then they elect people from each ward to a city council, for instance. But in large towns, sometimes the same people are elected at every one of those polling places. So the wards are really just to control the voting, to make it more manageable, because you don't want a huge city driving everybody to the same school on the same night to try to vote. So it's really, you have to decide, are you a city or are you a town? And if you're a town, then you can have the same people being elected by everyone in all the wards, but you still have those polling places.
And
So
Bedford is one of those, I think, considered one of the larger voting jurisdictions in the US, because all 20,000 voters in Bedford go to one high school and vote. And so, this is where if you do live in a larger town, these ideas of sort of splitting up into voting districts is an interesting idea, but that has to be done as a warrant article, and the citizens have to vote to decide to change into voting districts. And you need to recruit people to run for selectmen and ward clerk, or on all those different positions in each of those wards to administer elections as well.
Olivia, is there Is there a deadline or a rule about how towns with SB2 sessions, how many times they have to post it beforehand so that people are aware of it? And where do they do it? And how do they do it?
But I'll let Steve take that.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure about what the RSAs say on that, on what they have to do about posting and making the town meeting, the deliberative meeting public. I know in Rye, when I first started with the Civic League, they didn't do anything, and I started hanging up signs for the town election that says 1 in 5 vote. We can do better. A couple of years later, I got to paint handwritten signs 1 in 4 vote. We can do better. And then finally, the town now has signs up that that at least say that a town election's coming. They don't do anything for deliberative meeting.
They legally have to post this, and it can be posted online. It can be posted in the town clerk town offices, and usually libraries post it and so on. But in terms of how many times they have to notice this, I don't know that that says it. I mean, the better a town does at this, the more likely people are to come. You're right, Joanne, it's a good question. And this maybe takes citizen effort, publicizing things.
I will say that I just posted the state RSA that shows what they have to post for the required minimum posting. But to me, putting something that says the date of the election at town hall and the library doesn't promote it to voters. Yes,
No.
they are legally required to do that 14 days ahead of town meeting. But I think that people need to like check your town right now, see if they have the date of town meeting on their website that voters can find it. And I love when towns do little sandwich board signs that say town meeting is this day, or if they have like a lot of school districts, have like those little letter boards on their schools, like voting day is this day. Like I think the more a lot of people don't show up to town meeting to vote because they don't know when town meeting is. So the more we can get alerts out about when town meeting is, the better. And I think that, a lot. I know that one of the open democracy advocates talked to their town about using the blinking signs they have for traffic to put it on the traffic signs, the date of town meeting. There's little things that the town can do to like if you have a community access television to put it as a PSA on community access TV, or if your town has a local Facebook group, making sure the date of town meeting is on social media. So I think there is way more we can do to let people know voting hours for municipal elections. I can just speak from a city who has an October city election. We've had turnout as low as 5% at municipal elections, and that's dismal. And so we know that people can do better on advertising the date of town meeting, because a lot of people who said, oh, city elections were yesterday, I had no idea. This is what we don't want to happen. We want people to know that there's city elections and be excited to go to them. I see Cora is here from Dover. I think Dover is a model city that does some good advertising and a lot of folks in Dover are engaged in what's happening in local government. So I think there is ways that, communities can learn from each other about how they're advertising town meeting. And, also the big items like Kearsarge at the Kearsarge School District. These sort of hot button issues, if there's nothing exciting at town meeting, nobody cares about the fire truck but if people are very upset about spending money on a new fire truck, then turnout is higher. So also town meeting attendance varies by what's on the ballot.
In Rye, if we want people to show up, we just have to put on something. We're going to ban dogs at the beach.
Ban dogs at the beach.
Yeah, it's the only thing that ever brings people out.
And
That's something crazy.
you people, as being interested in town meeting, could easily be writing letters to the editor for your own town and your own local paper, and just give the time and the place. And, this is where we can make our voices known on our town's budget and on this important warrant article. It doesn't have to be long, but you get enough people putting that in, and many people read those local newspapers, so that would be a great idea. Something that we could all do fairly easily.
So
also
the
word of
SB2
mouth.
deliberative session is not town meeting. Is that
It-
true?
It's not, because they don't
Sure, yeah.
vote at it, yeah.
So I try to call it the town deliberative meeting, so it's not a town meeting. But, to try to help get more people to come out, we're trying to stick with the nomenclature town deliberative meeting. I don't know if it's legal or illegal, but it's what we've been doing in Rye to try to get more participation.
Mm.
Yeah, I think officially it's called a session, it's a deliberative session, because it's not an official meeting. One thing I was trying to do is find out if there is a quorum required in state law for town meetings. And although there are quorums required for all sorts of things like select board and planning board and so on, there is not for the town meeting. So if only 5 people come out in your town in that snowstorm, they're the ones who are going to make the decision. And it's legitimate. I found that in one source. Please don't hold me to this legally, but that's what I found out in my limited research.
And Joanne, I know you just moved, right, from one town to another. So,
Yes,
you got to learn about your new,
I know.
your
Yeah,
new town.
It's a big town. 19,000.
So you're in the same campus, Fran, with the big in Merrimack's
Yeah,
a big town.
Milford.
Milford.
yeah.
Other questions that folks might have about town meeting or how to make your voice heard? Or comments about campaigns? I'll just share a comment about somebody who ran a town meeting campaign. They were trying to get a local water ordinance, a groundwater ordinance. And they found that by talking to other people who were working on warrant article petitions, they traded, like, hey, if we get our people who support the groundwater ordinance to support the fire truck, will the people who support the
Oh.
fire truck support the water ordinance? And so that's the thing I love about town meeting is these sort of little deals that get done too, as far as like, okay, great. If the people who care about conservation, care also about the fire truck, you see these coalitions come together, and you also see, people divide on, they don't want to spend, money for the fire truck because they want to fund a school position. And so it's very interesting to sort of see what comes together, or people who want to build a new middle school or not build a new middle school. So there's lots of different coalitions that come together and dynamics at town meeting. And those people who can run really successful petition warrant article campaigns can have those relationships with the different groups of people that are organizing at town meeting. Steve?
Yeah, no, when the surf group wanted to, they were trying to restrict more surfing. They set up a text messaging where they got people to sign up, and then they were sending text messages so that people knew when to show up, so they didn't have to sit through the whole meeting.
Oh,
It is true that people will come only for the warrant articles that they really want to vote on. And I've seen that happen. The cell phone comes out when we get close to that, and the people are calling their friends.
my old
And,
town
and we
hall.
understand, like, some parents may not be able to sit through a 5-hour meeting and they want to
Yeah.
vote on a particular education thing or a particular thing, or the voters in
Yeah.
Rye who are surfers that want to have
Yeah.
access to the ocean whenever they want to surf. So these campaigns happen, and I think it's important to know what those local dynamics are in your community too.
Yeah.
And it's always fun, maybe I'm a democracy nerd, but to read back of the minutes from the last town meeting too, from the last couple of years, to just get a sense of like, what happened? What were those sort of debates at town meeting too?
We tried daycare too. We had the recreation group setting that up, and it worked for a few years. But then after a couple of years of the Rye Rec people getting all set up and having 1 or 2 kids, they just said they can't do it anymore.
But then other communities offer childcare and it's very successful. So I think Bristol is one of those communities that offers childcare and has a good network of people who, have childcare. And I think this also depends on whether you have a town meeting at 7 o'clock on a weeknight or you have town meeting on a Saturday. So if you have an all-day Saturday meeting, those dynamics change, because if parents on a school night are getting kids to bed, you don't see a lot of parents, but it's always great when you have like a 7-year-old falling asleep on the bleachers during town meeting. Other questions about town meeting?
So if you're in an SB2 town, is it publicized what the agenda's gonna be
Yes,
as far as,
that will all be posted somewhere. You may
Yeah,
have to.
it typically, if ours is on Saturday, so normally it's available on Monday. The Monday before,
Mhm.
David,
because they gotta print it, they make it, they gotta print copies. It's gotta be posted.
Mhm.
David, when is the where one available for your? Did we lose David? I also want to say that sometimes they show them as the sample warrant articles. So sometimes you see that in sample.
I was gonna mention that Hollis had their meeting on the town, right, a TV station. So people knew exactly when to go vote.
Yeah,
And that's what they did. That's the only thing they did was drive to vote and go back home.
So I see in the chat, Sayer has posted a question. In Concord, I see there are planning meetings and city council meetings. Are those considered the business meetings referred to earlier?
No.
They are not.
So the planning meetings, so the planning board is making sort of zoning decisions and issuing building permits. And city council votes on things every month. So instead of having warrant articles annually like other communities do, the city council is making decisions year round on different issues. And they normally have one period of time where they make a budget decision. But in those cities, the voters have delegated those powers that voters have at traditional town meetings to the city council to make decisions. So there is no annual meeting. But I urge, so, also the city charter and town charters are sort of those governing constitutions, and they so that sort of tells you how your government works too. Okay. I'll just say thank you all so much for joining us. Autumn and I learned a lot trying to put this presentation together. If additional questions come up about your specific community, we're happy to connect you with other resources. The Municipal Association is another good resource about how local government works. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and I hope you can get the word out about your municipal election and build power to get people to participate in it. Thank you.
You.
Thank you, Olivia.